everyone. I'm Sandra Levy. I'm senior editor of Drugstore News. Today, we're speaking with Ramita Tandon. She's Chief Biopharma Officer at Walgreens. Hi, Ramita. Welcome.
Hi, Sandra. Great to see you and great to be here today.
Same. Congratulations, first of all, on the 3-year anniversary of Walgreens Clinical Trials Enterprise. That's really exciting.
Yeah, this is an exciting time for the business. This past June just marked our 3-year anniversary when Walgreens launched its clinical trials arm, and you've been very much part of this journey from day one. But in the short amount of time, we've become such a powerful force in the industry and just reshaping how clinical trials is being conducted, who we reach out to, and how we engage patients for clinical research.
Well, that's terrific. So yeah, tell us about your team's accomplishments since the launch.
First and foremost, like I mentioned, obviously it's just been an exciting time for us over the last 3 years. We are now the longest standing commitment to clinical research from a U.S. retail pharmacy perspective. And as if I think about, when we first started, it was really around leveraging the pharmacy-led assets. We have such a significant presence in our communities across this nation. We've been a trusted brand for well over 100 years, and we've tapped into the full horsepower of Walgreens over the last 3 years to really activate our community-based locations, our trusted and our deep patient relationships, to the point, Sandra, we've reached out to over 20 million customers to participate in a clinical trial. And to us, that's really around making sure patients are research ready. And that's really the first step, just being asked to participate, particularly when a lion's share of this nation have never even heard about a clinical trial or been invited. So in our first 3 years, just reaching out to over 20 million customers to be able to invite them, educate them, and, get them to participate in a clinical trial is such an exciting milestone for us as an organization. We've recruited a patient base that's, that identifies themselves, ethnically diverse, racially or ethnically diverse. It's 44%. So if I think about just the intention when we kicked off this research enterprise, it was about making sure that we improve the representation of clinical research across this nation. And just the patient base that we've recruited, 63% are women. 44%, as I mentioned, identify themselves, racially or ethnically diverse. We've recruited, from an age perspective, patients that are 60 and over. So what that shows is, our presence in our communities and just activating our assets is allowing us to bring an inclusive participation in medical research.
Yeah, you touched upon some of the challenges. So how do you gain this representation and accessibility for that population?
I think that's important. I mean, obviously, there's been so much advances that's been happening in healthcare that we've seen, but, a lion's share of the trials that are being conducted today still fail to meet their enrollment goals and within the stated timeframes. And as I mentioned earlier, a very small percentage of the U.S. population participates in trials. And in fact, nearly 3/4 that do participate identify themselves as white. So, we set to really solve the notion of redefining that patient experience in research. And that's really rooted in the fact that we believe that if you bring clinical research to where patients are located, that is going to help support the ability to bring more diverse patient populations into trials. And one of the things that we've done is really create a flexible trial model. And what that means is we know it's not a one-size-fits-all strategy across the nation, right? We have consumers that are in the urban areas. We have consumers that are in deep South or rural parts of America. So we wanted to make sure that our model was flexible to allow for everybody to have the ability to participate. So whether it's, leveraging in-store our stores and our locations to be able to have patients come into the locations to learn about a clinical trial or have clinical trial services conducted at one of our, clinical trial centers. We've set it up in a virtual model where patients can be able to participate in a digital format or even at home where protocols allow for home care setting. So ultimately, our goal is to make sure that participation is convenient and less burdensome, which is why we made sure that we've created this flexible trial model. And then finally, we also recently launched our patient advisory board. And that makes up a number of patient experts that have had lived experiences in clinical trials and really helping Walgreens and the industry to make sure that we're mindful that, trials have to be patient-centric. So today we're leveraging that board to help us, one, drive awareness and educate patient communities about clinical trials. We're leveraging that patient advisory board to help us, making sure we're designing and improving the engagement model with our patients. So when they do get information from Walgreens, they feel comfortable about, yeah, you know what? I now understand what a clinical trial is and how it can benefit my particular care journey and feel comfortable to participate. So I think, just the challenges of, low diversity in clinical trials is really, for us, really trying to include and integrate more culturally competent outreach mechanisms, making sure the materials that we use, meet the needs of our patient populations and the communities that they're in. But more importantly, the engagement models that we leverage, whether it's texting, emailing, phone calls, or even snail mail, we're being very personalized and making sure it lands to the communities that it's intended for.
That's fabulous. I know you also said last year when I met you in person that reaching out to young people is significant. It's a big opportunity. How is that all playing out now?
Our model success is really clear. It's really around bringing trials to where people are, right? And it's about reducing barriers to participation. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is using the insights that we have on our consumers and patients to really help us profile the patient communities well before we start to engage. So really understanding the patient journey, whether we're using the front of store insights, whether it's the pharmacy, real-time transactions, but ultimately that informs the type of engagement model we use. Again, whether it's texting, emailing, using mail or phone calls. And so whether it's the older population or even the younger population, it's really trying to first understand that patient population first, inform our engagement model, and then to be able to do the outreach using more culturally competent information so that when the information lands, people are able to consume the information in a way that's relevant to them and to be able to help then improve our conversion rates by their participation in our trials. So, obviously a lot of our younger population leverages a lot of the digital technologies that's out in the ecosystem. So where we're able to leverage a lot of our digital or our virtual capabilities, we're able to include that in the workflows. So that kind of improves the opportunity for the young population to participate. And I think the other piece that's really critical that we've seen successful for us in the last 3 years is really activating what we call our Triple E framework. That is really the engagement, the empowerment, and the enablement of patient populations to be activated, to be research ready, and to participate. Sandra, a lot of young population don't even understand what a clinical trial is and how it can benefit in their overall care journey. And so by spending the time to partner with the communities and this population so that they're educated and engaged, it makes a huge difference for them to be able to participate. And the conversion rates are certainly reflected in many of the trials that we're participating in today.
So what about collaboration with others? I know you mentioned life science partners across the industry. Particularly, I saw something about AstraZeneca. Would you be able to expand on your partnership with AstraZeneca?
Yeah, Sandra, really excited. We've partnered with over 28 plus life science companies across 11 different therapeutic areas. And, we've secured over 35 plus biopharma partnerships to bring trials into the communities that we serve today. And one of those collaborations, as you mentioned, is AstraZeneca. And last year, we supported AstraZeneca's AIR mobile units. And AIR stands for Accelerating Innovations and Research Excellence in Clinical Trials. And these were the mobile units where the project involved bringing clinical research buses to the parking lots of Walgreens stores in Los Angeles and San Antonio. So the Clinic on Wheels was really meant to pre-screen patients for many of the AstraZeneca trials, including some of the trials that we've been working with AstraZeneca, to really educate patients around clinical trial and some disease education. And ultimately, that partnership resulted in more than 20,000 people engaged and more than 1,900 individuals getting pre-screened. So that type of collaboration, really getting into the communities and activating the communities to get them research ready, really starts to see the downstream benefit of patients when they actually participate in clinical trials.
That's so exciting. So what about the pharmacist? Now, what is the role for the pharmacist in the clinical trials area?
From the outset of the launch of our clinical trials enterprise, it's really rooted on the fact that community-based clinical trials represents a significant paradigm change in the world of medical research. I think historically, and even today, we know that many potential participants have been challenged because of geographic and logistical challenges. And that's really limited the ability of bringing a diverse and highly represented patient populations in trials and in trial results. And so from our perspective, by hosting trials in retail settings like pharmacies, it allows us to really reduce those barriers to participate and allows patients the opportunity to join. And so integrating, retail pharmacies into clinical research just offers a unique opportunity to bridge the gap between research and real world data collection. And so, some examples of, leveraging pharmacists or pharmacy care teams sometimes just includes just using them to help educate and drive awareness for patients coming into the counters. Now, we know obviously, it's a very busy time and busy space. And we use oftentimes the script bags, for example, to be able to provide information about a particular trial. So when a patient goes home, they can learn more information about that particular trial. And there's oftentimes QR codes on the prescription bags for patients to be able to call and to be able to learn more about that trial. So, the essence of leveraging the pharmacy infrastructure, the care teams, the trust that we've had, well over 120 years in the communities has been part of the success that we've seen over the last 3 years and really, anchoring around the criticality and the importance of community-based clinical research and to really tackle the issues around representation and the accessibility of clinical trials.
Well, that's exciting. So the next question, I guess that's the last question. How many community-centered clinical trial sites are there? And as far as the future, what do you see in the future for this area?
Yeah, that's great. Over the last 3 years, we now have 20 community-based clinical trials within our pharmacy locations. And, it's been really exciting for us to leverage these centers as a mechanism to really support clinical trials in community-based settings. But it's really, from our perspective, a very pivotal role in shaping the future of clinical trials and leading the way in the future of trial models, looking at alternative sites of care and forging strategic partnerships, both in the private setting as well as in the public setting, as being viewed as best practice, right? We've been very intentional. We've been very deliberate in selecting our locations for the 20 clinical centers that we have today. We're using our data and our insights from the industry to really help shape the patient populations that we target around those areas, and making sure that when we start to create the right engagement models, those patients have the ability to, one, learn about clinical research that is within those areas, but also make it easier for them to participate. All of our clinical research centers are situated in very high traffic retail locations, so that certainly enhances the accessibility and participation of patients. Now, our clinical trials team has grown since the last time we've spoken. We have an upwards of 60 people now that are dedicated clinical trial team professionals that comprise of project managers, clinical trial operators, experts, some pharmacists that have been trained in clinical research, but really just those who have prior experience in working in contract research or site management organizations that now make up this entire research enterprise.
So the future looks very rosy. I'm so glad you shared everything with us, and I hope you'll come back next year or even sooner to share more progress.
Thank you, Sandra. Look forward to it.